Hello everyone and welcome to today's Euractiv virtual event where we'll be talking about what opportunities clean gas technologies present for the European Union. My name is Dave Keating, I'm a journalist based in Brussels and I'm going to be guiding us through today's conversation coming at you live from the Euractiv studios in the heart of the EU quarter. Now, our discussion comes at a time when hydrogen is a big buzzword in Brussels at the moment. It's very much in focus. According to the European Commission, renewable and low-carbon hydrogen is a key building block toward a climate-neutral and zero-pollution economy in 2050. It can replace most fossil fuels and feedstock, its proponents say. Renewable and low-carbon hydrogen has also been a big focus of research and innovation in Europe. Maintaining and expanding Europe's technological leadership in these technologies and creating economic growth and jobs across the value chain and across the Union, it also offers a chance to manufacture and deploy clean energy technology here in the EU. Gas advocates argue that biomethane, green hydrogen, and synthetic gases should be seen as a crucial part of the EU's long-term energy security, as they are renewable and easily transported and stored. But climate campaigners are more skeptical about these technologies. And some of them suspect that the promise of green hydrogen gas in the future is being used to justify investment in new gas infrastructure now, locking the EU in to the continued use of fossil fuel gas. But there are some very promising technological developments around gas. Renewable and low-carbon gas can be used to power vehicles, it can be injected in gas networks for heat, or it can serve for producing electricity. Additionally, biogas can have a positive impact in the agricultural sector. The demand for renewable and low-carbon methane and hydrogen and their end uses will have important implication also for gas networks, the infrastructure that we use to transport gas. The future role of the EU gas market and infrastructure may be determined by the ability of the sector to decarbonize and to switch to low and zero carbon forms of gas. So there's lots to discuss when it comes to these new gas technologies, which some are very enthusiastic about and some are more skeptical about. We've assembled a panel of experts here with us today to talk about this issue. Let me introduce them now. First, we have Spanish center-left MEP Nicolas González Cesares. He's a member of the Parliament's ITRE committee, the industry committee in the European Parliament. Then we have Luca Giansanti, Senior Vice President and Head of European Government Affairs at Italian energy company Eni. Benjamin Denny, Senior Policy Advisor at the Industry Association Industrial Europe. And finally, Stefan Kolb, Director of Regulatory Affairs at Viessmann, which is a German manufacturer of heating, industrial, and refrigeration systems. I should note, Stefan will not have been on your program before. He is replacing Alix Chambres, also from Viessmann, who was unfortunately able to join us because something last minute came up. So we do apologize for the manel, the all-male panel, but that last-minute adjustment turned this into an all-male affair. We usually try to avoid them, but sometimes it can't be avoided. Now, before we get started, I want to run through a couple housekeeping notes. You guys at home will be able to ask your questions to the panelists by using the Q&A feature on Vimeo. I'm going to go ahead and start that now. So you can ask your questions at any point from now. You can ask them anonymously or identify yourself and the organization you're from. If it's to a specific person, please indicate which of the panelists your question is to. And at the end of the panel, I'm going to be reading out your questions to the panelists. So let's start out with some introductory comments. I have a couple starter questions for each of our panelists. Let's start with Nicolas. What do you think, Nicolas, the place of hydrogen and biomethane and synthetic gases should be in Europe's energy transition? Do they have a role?
Of course, they have a role. First, let me say thank you to everybody for inviting me to this debate. First, I want to say that the objective of the policy should be not to create a market for biogas, green hydrogen, or even renewable electricity. The objective must be to decarbonize the economy in the most efficient, sustainable, and safe way, allowing citizens a clean and affordable energy. Me, as a shadow of the energy sector integration, I really believe that is an essential strategy to address the necessary acceleration of the union decarbonization. We need to create a regulatory framework to remove barriers that hinder the implementation of clean energy solutions. Let's take a look at hydrogen. We have high hopes for it. Hydrogen strategy is one of the pillars of the energy system integration. A vector such as clean hydrogen will be necessary to decarbonize sectors where direct electrification is not possible. For this, it is essential to begin by clarifying the different types of hydrogen, as well as establishing standards that mark its characteristics and origin. It is also an industrial opportunity for the European Union. However, we must prevent the promotion of demand from having perverse effects and promoting grey hydrogen. The ultimate goal must be clean and sustainable gases. And today is the green. The green hydrogen is the most sustainable one. Planning is essential to avoid any further looking from fossil fuel infrastructures. I think that here the taxonomy regulation and the revision of the TNE regulation will help. And biogas, I strongly believe biogas has great potential to contribute to decarbonization, also to improve the circular economy, with synergies with other sectors as agriculture or waste sector for wastewaters of the cities. And waste can reduce methane emissions if we use it for biogas production. Of course, we have to learn from the first generation of biofuels produced from food and feed crops. We have some problems and we have to avoid the same problems now. But let me conclude the first remark by saying that with the next generation EU instrument, we have an opportunity to invest in the technologies and process of the future, to be competitive and to improve the life of the people. And I think that in this pathway to decarbonization, to be climate neutral by 2050, of course, hydrogen will be one of the most important tools and vectors in the energy sector to decarbonize our economy. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Let's go to Stefan now. Now you're coming from the perspective of a company that's designing systems which use energy quite a bit. So how do you view the place of gas in Europe's energy transition?
So thanks a lot for inviting me and for having the opportunity to share our views. So let me answer basically in three short blocks. On the first, taking the people perspective. Of course, I'm speaking about the buildings and the challenges of, I would say, decarbonizing our homes and buildings towards 2030, 2050. Second would be the energy system perspective that was just mentioned, and that's the sector integration potential that we have. And third, quickly, just the technologies that we need and the technology roadmaps that we need to align to have, I would say, end-use technologies aligned with the roadmaps of decarbonizing gas. And of course, everything, basically what I'm saying has to be seen in the context of green gases, because it's clear that, of course, only green gases fulfill, I would say, the needed contribution of the energy vector to decarbonization. So first, from a people perspective, we believe that green gases, or hydrogen being one of them, biomethane maybe in the first step, has a huge role to play in the decarbonization of the building and the building stock and the building, I would say, the building sector as in general. And that is mainly because the buildings, the building stock, and our buildings are extremely diverse, and the people that live in them are diverse too. So basically, what we need is, I would say, a range of, I would say, opportunities and offers and the technologies and energy carriers to make sure basically that everybody can cope with this huge challenge of decarbonizing our home and heatings and HVAC applications. And we believe that decarbonized gases can help people so that nobody is left behind with the decarbonization challenge. Ultimately, matching, I would say, this huge diversity of the heterogeneity of the building stock, and I would say also the income distribution of the people who have to invest after all. And we believe that decarbonized gases, green gases of renewable origin in particular, can be a huge help to bring people on board and also ultimately to maintain acceptance of this huge, I would say, project, Green Deal. And also, I would say, ultimately, support for the EU, for the European Union from the citizens. So that is the buildings perspective. The second perspective is I would say, the energy system integration angle, the sector integration, and the overall, I would say, system efficiency. Because it's clear that, in our view at least, it's clear that I would say electrification is clear will be a huge or maybe the biggest backbone of decarbonizing our buildings and homes. But we think that basically from a system perspective, green gases and for heating for the building sector, basically, and electrification, for example, in particular via heat pumps, of course, will mutually reinforce each other, because we believe that from an energy system perspective, if you put all your bets on just one angle, for example, electrification angle, it is clear that I would say the system needs, for example, in terms of renewable energy capacities that you have to deliver all the terawatt hours, and the backup capacities that you need to provide firm capacity, resource adequacy, as we call it, in particular in winter when heat demand is highest, is a huge challenge. And not least, of course, then also basically reducing the strain on the grids, on the investments that you need to basically get your systems right, mutually reinforcing each other without, I would say, getting the costs too high. And it was shown that this energy, I would say, this overall energy system perspective and efficiency is better that if you have green gases in the building sector than if you have a sort of one-size-fits-all solution and approach. And the third remark that I would like to make in this first statement: do we have the technologies to cope basically with this variety of green gases, be it methane from biosources, or be it methane from synthetic, from hydrogen ultimately, and be it with hydrogen directly injected into the grid? Yes, we have them. We are now ramping them up. We are investing, the sector is investing into equipment that can digest and process hydrogen, for example, safely, or also process blends of methane and hydrogen safely, so that we are sure we have the technologies, for example, also combined heat and power operating on hydrogen, producing electricity and heat at the same time. But what we would need is, from the policy perspective, is a sort of a synchronization, I would say, of the roadmaps that drive the decarbonization of the molecules of the energy carrier, and then on one hand side, and then fitting basically the technology roadmaps that we have to roll out, and basically ensure that the replacement of stock is basically made in a way that it's most cost effective, that it's more that it suits the needs of the people and the decarbonization of the buildings agenda. So this synchronization aspect is something that we believe should now be taken up in the Green Deal legislation, this year and next year.
Makes sense. Luca, let's turn to you next. What is Eni's thinking about the role of gas and new gas technologies in the EU's energy mix?
Oh, thank you, Dave, and thanks to Euractiv for inviting me. First of all, at Eni, we have made a commitment to achieve long-term carbon neutrality by both reducing and offsetting GHG emissions. In particular, we defined strategies with verifiable targets for 2035 and 2050 to reduce emissions and contribute to the overall climate neutrality target in the EU by 2050. By that time, 2050, all our products sold to customers and clients will be either bio, blue, meaning low carbon, or green. At the same time, I have the feeling that it's not just a matter of identifying trajectories or setting targets. It's also a matter of rethinking the current energy model, promoting technologies such as biomethane, CO2 capture and storage, and the hydrogen supply chain, of course. Gas can contribute actively to the decarbonization process of the European economy, both directly and indirectly. Directly by accelerating the switch from more polluting fuels. Indirectly in the production of blue, low carbon hydrogen, thanks to the capture of CO2, and also in the production of other renewable gases that were mentioned before, biomethane and green hydrogen. Decarbonization in the end will be achieved through a combination of existing and new technologies, and it will depend on the results of ongoing research, large-scale deployment possibility, public acceptance, and of course, economic sustainability. In doing so, our feeling is that an inclusive approach has to be maintained to all technologies that could contribute to mitigate and adapt to climate change. No technical possibility to reduce emissions should be ruled out. In particular, as I mentioned before, at Eni, we strongly believe in CCS, carbon capture and storage. We do have at present two main projects, one in Liverpool Bay in the UK for the storing of CO2, and the other one in Ravenna in northern Italy. We plan to make our site in Ravenna one of the largest CCS plants in the world by exploiting the storage potential connected to the now depleted offshore gas fields in the Adriatic Sea, but also by sharing with a circular economy approach the industrial and logistic fabric already present there, the existing infrastructure still operational, and CO2 capture system. This project will allow the development of a low-carbon energy district, of a blue energy district, with the possible distribution of hydrogen to industrial users and the transport sector. Ravenna offers a real unique opportunity for CCS. It has also the potential to create new job opportunities for an industrial hub that was facing a grim perspective, leveraging on the specific know-how and skills of the region and its people, its workers, in the logic of the just transition, actually. We are not the only ones at Eni to believe in CCS. A further testimony of the renewed attention for CCS can be found both in statements and communications by the European Commission, but also in the number of CCS, CCUS projects that applied for the Innovation Fund's first call for large-scale projects. There we find in Europe 14 projects under the CCS category and around 30 other projects under different categories. This tells you that CCS, which is not a new technology, can have a second life in the future. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I mean, we've heard about a lot of different technologies here. So Benjamin, what potential do you think all of these new technologies have for decarbonization?
Yeah, good afternoon to all of you. Let me first state that Industrial Europe is a trade union federation. So we represent workers. We speak on behalf of the almost 6 million of men and women who work in the we spoke about on behalf of the million of men and women who work in the different sides of the EU industries, and we represent workers from different sides, extraction, energy production, as well as manufacturing. So our members are 200 national trade union organizations, which represent altogether between 6 and 6.5 million of men and women working in the industry. So we would like first to insist on the fact that the EU has announced, at least the Commission has announced its willingness to reach carbon neutrality by 2050 and to revise the 2030 target. As Industrial Europe, we support the objective of reaching climate neutrality by 2050. But and as trade union organization, we insist that the way we would like to use to reach that ambition is the just transition. Just transition means that we need to build the low carbon transition with people, not against them, and with workers, ensuring that the measures that will be put in place, that the policy instruments that will be implemented will respect workers' rights, will not increase inequalities. In other words, a just transition towards a low carbon economy must create quality jobs in industries, must ensure labor transitions through reskilling, upskilling of workers, must also provide social protection system to those who will not be able to find a job in the low carbon economy. And last but not least, there is nothing about us without us. We insist that just transition requires a strong workers' participation, good industrial relations, and social dialogue. It's absolutely crucial. Now, looking to deep decarbonization, if it has to be achieved in less than 3 decades, we have to acknowledge that this is an unprecedented challenge, keeping in mind that, including for the EU, fossil fuels still represent the most important source of our energy needs. 70% of our energy needs are still provided or covered by fossil fuels nowadays in Europe. So we learn as we do. We have to acknowledge the complexity of the situation, the fact that that people, workers, regions, companies have to struggle with an impressive diversity of situation of economic systems across regions, across member states, across sectors. Now, when it comes to gas and the gas industry, if we know that we want to build a just transition towards a low carbon economy, we also have to look at where we are right now. Gas still provide 20% of the EU global energy consumption, 2018 figures. It represents 220,000 jobs on the supply side. There are also a certain number of jobs in the demand side, which is quite important as well to be taken into account. So yes, clean gas technologies will have a role to play in that transition. It's not our role as trade unions to tell which scenario is the right one. In terms of what kind of volumes, what kind of gas must be needed. Is not our role. Our role is simply to say that the measures that will be put in place must be, of course, in line with the Paris Agreement mandate and with, more broadly, the SDGs, because it's also what is at stake is also human rights. It's also avoiding land grabbing. It's also avoiding biodiversity loss. We have to ensure, second thing, that the transition will be based on a strong, sustainable industrial strategy, which will strengthen, maintain industrial value chains in Europe and the related jobs. And then, last but not least, all the measures adopted will have to ensure that nobody will be left behind, including in those regions and in those sectors where the co-benefits of the low carbon economy will be more difficult to secure. Thank you.
Thanks, Benjamin. We'll be coming back to this topic of the just transition, which, as you said, is very much focused on workers and how you have, especially regions that are dependent on coal mining, stuff like that, how they are going to transition here. Let's talk about exactly how green these gas technologies are. Luca, let me ask you a question on this. When you're looking at these various new clean gas technologies, and maybe particularly green hydrogen gas, how do they compare with coal and oil? Just how much are they less than emissions? We know just regular natural gas has a lower emissions intensity than coal and oil. How much bigger is that difference when it comes to these new clean gas technologies? And what do we do with that information, I guess?
But actually, there is a big difference. I mean, I was mentioning before decarbonized gas through the capture of CO2. I mean, with the current technology, you can abate up to 90% of the CO2 emissions from gas, which is already a lot. And you have decarbonized or low carbon gas, what we call also the blue hydrogen. Technology's improvement in the future could bring this percentage up to 100%. So it's already a lot. The switch from coal to gas, it's already underway. Gas has been contributing a lot to this switch, of course, and to the reduction of emissions all over the European continent. If you look at the figures of last year, the contribution of gas to decarbonization together with renewables has been impressive. So all these technologies for decarbonized and renewable gases should be taken, as I said before, into account. And they need to be recognized as under the label, I would say, of transitional activities. Let me mention briefly here the EU taxonomy and the draft delegated act, which is now under public consultation. In the taxonomy regulation adopted earlier this year, there was a clear recognition of the importance of transitional activities as a category to be taken into account. This category of transitional activities has to be filled with contents, meaning that under this label, under this chapter, gas has to be recognized with, how to say, a gradual approach. Because its contribution to mitigate climate change has to be incorporated into this. And the same will happen, or should happen, actually, with the upcoming review of the 10E regulation, where infrastructure will come under the spotlight.
What about, Luca, let me just follow up on that. When you compare these, let's say, green hydrogen to renewable solar and wind, how does it compare to those?
I mean, green hydrogen is produced through the electrolyzers powered with renewables energy. So it's clean. How to say it? It's absolutely clean. So it has the same. The problem with green hydrogen that at present its share in the market it's minimal. It's difficult to foresee how demand and offer could grow over time in this, and we should adopt a gradual approach in order to boost and ramp up hydrogen. In doing this, we believe that you need both low carbon and green hydrogen as complementary, because the starting point is really a situation where individual member states have different positions, different approaches. Northern Europe is in a totally different context than Southern Europe. You have to take into account all these differences within Europe. And in order to put into motion a dynamic which will bring both offer and demand of low carbon and green hydrogen to grow, you really need to use whatever you have, knowing that blue hydrogen, low carbon hydrogen already is able to abate, as I said, almost 90% of CO2 emissions. And from there to move slowly from hydrogen clusters or valleys up to national markets.
Stefan, let me ask you the same question, comparing different fuel sources. What about from a cost perspective? I mean, I imagine that some of these new gas technologies, a lot of research and development is going into them, and so the cost of that research and development has to be factored in somewhere. How do you anticipate the cost factor is going to come into play here as we're looking at different competing energy sources and people are trying to decide between them?
Let me try to distinguish between the cost of the energy carrier and the cost of the, I would say, the technologies that uses the energy carrier, all right? Because I think when we have this debate about where should, for example, green hydrogen go, of course, the first question is, what will be the cost of this of the energy carrier? And there, I would say, you know, also listening to Luca, we are the user of the molecules, right? So I would say a boiler, let's say a boiler that uses methane, basically he doesn't care if it's biomethane, fossil methane, or methane that is synthetic, completely produced from renewables. So I think this is one angle that the greening of the gas and the cost of the energy carrier will depend, of course, on a lot of, I would say, factors such as can you ramp up the production of green hydrogen, for example, abroad. So we import a lot of fossil gas. So I guess, and that's the discussion in Germany, I'm a German citizen, of course, I think there's a sort of a consensus that you need to import the desired, I would say, to reach the desired number or amount of volumes of hydrogen that you would need, to some extent at least, from, I would say, sustainable sources produced, for example, from offshore wind farms somewhere else. So that's the energy carrier, and you know, probably it's not our role to say, okay, we should have this and this development on the energy carrier, but what we need is basically alignment, or we need to know what is basically the energy carrier that will reach the technologies. So let me now go to the technologies. And the technologies is like that we see now a lot of movement of making the end use applications fit for the hydrogen. I would say for converting, I would say for burning methane coming from fossil sources to hydrogen or hydrogen blends. And what we believe at Wiesmann is that, for example, it is no problem to ensure a safe operation of appliances if we know a little bit in advance of up to I don't know 20-30% admixture of hydrogen molecules to methane. This can be done basically at zero cost for the end user, because the technologies are known. You have to make some adaptations, but it's not a disruptive technology change. Also, if you speak about the technologies that are capable to use 100% hydrogen, the pilots are out there. We know what to do. It's more a matter of investing and making the products, I would say, fit, and knowing what are basically the roadmaps, so that we can say, okay, according to this roadmap, we know that many people will ask for a certain upgradability, for example, from a boiler that he or she has today, and then with a certain kit, for example, we can upgrade to 100% hydrogen if there's a decision that this part of a certain gas distribution network would be upgraded. And the cost for that is also, I would say, if we know in advance, the cost would be pretty not insignificant, but pretty low, in a low three-digit figure at max. So the technologies are there. It's more basically giving the signals to go in a certain route. And maybe the last remark is, of course, we believe that if you look into the future, I would say, sectors, playing together of for example, the gas and the electricity, and let's not forget the mobility sector, of course, who all needs electricity, then probably, or that is probably a safe bet, that you need to be much more flexible in adapting supply and demand. You need to adapt your basically your heat output, your heat source, your heat energy carrier, maybe to a certain condition wind speeds and availability of for example, PV power production. So we believe that being flexible and being able to react on the demand side, then to the supply side, including maybe playing around with gas and electricity together to optimize the system integration and sector integration, that will be probably a way forward that helps people to cope with the energy transition and also then reduce the overall, I would say, the costs of the overall energy transition, including everything, costs of energy carrier, costs of technologies, and costs basically of rolling all this out.
Thanks, that's quite interesting. Thanks for that insight. Let's move on to the political dimension here. And political dimension, that means you, Nicholas. Let me ask you about this debate about whether or not gas should be considered a transition fuel and thus be eligible for EU funding, for instance, from the European Investment Bank. That's been a big topic of discussion, while coal and oil are not. As we've already heard, a lot of these new gas technologies, such as hydrogen, can actually use existing gas infrastructure. So the gas infrastructure that would be built today could be used in the future for carbon-free hydrogen. Do you think that it is therefore appropriate for European money to be going toward gas infrastructure and gas projects now, or do you see that as incompatible with the Green Deal?
Great question, and you will find different answers here in the Parliament, depending the group or the MEP. I think that the natural gas has a role as a transitional fuel. Another thing is that it must be supported by funds, which are limited. These funds must be dedicated to the clean technologies. Natural gas, of course, has a role because it's cheap in the short term, but it can cause lock-in effect, as I said before. In addition, infrastructure investments in infrastructure typically have an economic life from 20 to 60 years. The steps taken in the next 10 years will be crucial for building a climate-neutral system. So I think that the EU already has extensive and valuable natural gas infrastructure. Additional natural gas infrastructure will increase the risk of these lock-ins. I think that we can use the existing infrastructure in mobilizing transportation of the new hydrogen. Also, I really prefer the green hydrogen based on renewables, but of course we can use this infrastructure. Of course, the green hydrogen and other low carbon hydrogens will have and will need a support in investments, but of course must be free or almost free carbon hydrogen to support it. I think, for example, that Next Generation EU cannot support new infrastructures in LNG gas, but of course can support new electrolyzer for green hydrogen.
I see some questions coming in the chat. So if you have a question, make sure to put it in the Q&A feature. That's the little button with the question mark on it. I usually mention that at the beginning. I think I forgot this time. The chat is just for statements. The Q&A is for the question mark. That way I can see your questions as they come in. Keep sending those. I do see some great questions in the chat. If you could just move them to the Q&A, that would be great. Continuing on this political theme, Benjamin, let me ask you, when we're talking about funding and what should get funding, then again we get into this question about the just transition and funds that are specifically intended to help workers in these situations. How do you feel about funds that are meant to be going toward the green energy transition going to gas projects right now?
Yeah, it's a quite complicated discussion. Actually, it's absolutely important to have the right level of granularity in that debate, and I'm afraid that behind the words gas project, we have actually a wide variety of different projects. And I said, as I said in my preliminary intervention, for us, it's clear that the recovery, the EU budget spending must be in line with the Green Deal objectives, must be in line with the carbon neutrality objective by 2050. And we all agree that, I think that we all agree that we will need to roll out a wide portfolio of different technologies to be able to achieve that goal. Keeping in mind that the energy efficiency first principle should apply. We need, of course, a lot of renewables. We will need electrification, and we will need CCS. We will need some kind of green gas, green hydrogen in the menu. Now. Some speakers previously said that gas could be seen as well as a bridge technology in some regions, especially maybe in regions being highly dependent on coal. And when I said that we might need further granularity, we might need also to have that discussion on a case-by-case basis, on a project-by-project basis. Let's say that. If the wide majority of the funds, and maybe, I don't know, 90%, it's not an official Industrial Europe position, but let's say that 90% of the fund would be dedicated to low carbon and green initiatives, it fully makes sense. But at the same time, if one member state or one region would decide to go from an energy mix based, I don't know, 80% on coal towards an energy mix based mainly on renewables with, let's dream, 80% of electricity provided by renewable energy in the coming 2 decades. It could make sense to help that region or that member states to unlock its current dependence on coal, to go for some kind of gas technologies for a certain period of time. It's just a matter of having some bottom-up flexibility where it makes sense. For us, this is a little bit how we see the current debate, and there is also a debate to have on R&D projects and innovation projects. Mr. Giansanti, sorry for the pronunciation, referred to the 100 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour, which is currently the reference, as far as I know, in the delegated act for the taxonomy regulation. It might make sense also to continue to finance activities that would try to bring the gas technology as closer or even beyond that current technological limit. So again, I think that behind the big words gas, we really need to have the appropriate granularity to examine the different kind of projects we are talking about, and also regarding on a case-by-case basis, what are the situation in the different regions, in the different sectors.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, within that rubric of a gas investment, there are so many different types of projects. Luca, let me ask you this question on the same vein. I mean, how do you respond to this skepticism from some climate campaigners about the idea of gas as a bridge fuel and their concerns that any investment, whether it's research or physical infrastructure in gas, is locking the EU into a fossil fuel for the next decades?
Yeah, but first of all, I mean, we started talking about gases. It's not only gas as we knew it up to now. It's about gases, both decarbonized and renewable gases, with a variety of possibilities. Again, as I said before, sorry to repeat myself, but I mean, every and each activity and technology that can contribute to abate GHG emissions has to be taken into consideration, has to be used, and has to be promoted in the transition. The energy system has always been in a transition. This is only another one, and a more challenging one. And the more you have ambitious targets, the more you need whatever technology is available now and in the future to reach that challenging target. I don't see, I mean, in this transition, the risk of a lock-in effect. Let me go back to what I mentioned before, capturing CO2 emissions from steam methane reforming through CCS. I mean, there is a limit on the quantity of CO2 that you can store underground, either offshore or onshore. It's a big quantity, but it's limited. It's not ever-ending. So, I mean, on that side, on the side of that technology, the CCS technology, I don't see this risk getting in. We all agree, and I said it at the beginning of this debate, that climate neutrality is our joint endeavor and our common target for 2050. The debate is really about how to go there, how to reach that goal. But in the end, of course, that will be green hydrogen and so on, where possible. Electrification, we move on. We are not fighting against electrification. On the contrary, that's a very important driving decarbonization factor in our economy. But the real debate is about how to get there, ensuring at the same time a just and fair transition.
Yeah, makes sense. Let's stay on this theme of funding. And I will ask Stefan, when we're thinking about all the new funds that are going to be available now, notably through the COVID Recovery Fund, the 750 billion euro COVID Recovery Fund, which we're awaiting agreement on, but hopefully is coming any day now. And then, of course, the regular EU funds available from the long-term budget in the next budgetary cycle from 2021 to 2027. Where do you think the EU should be prioritizing its research and innovation funding for these new technologies? And what is really needed from these EU funds for businesses to be really developing and deploying these new technologies?
So if the question is about research and development, my personal opinion is that the biggest challenge is basically the integration aspect of the technologies. So what I mean by that is that if you want to have a system that is really efficient on the system level, then we have to bring, I would say, the disciplines closer together. So that means, for example, the interplay between digitalization, between, for example, demand-side management, between, I would say, the heat generators, between novel ways to have, for example, fuel cell technology stationary, or so how to bring them together in a way that really storage that couples the sectors, for example, then moving ahead with the decentralization agenda, empowering people. Let's not forget, this is in my opinion still a very valid, I would say, headline, or let's say target in itself. Decentralization and bringing the people on board. So how these solutions can act together and reinforce, basically, for example, now the renovation wave, right? So that you have a future-proof roadmap, for example, for bringing down the emissions of a building, making buildings an active part of the energy system, as it's often called. I think that is an angle where we still can get much better, because there is, in my view, still a lot of, I would say, effort needed to bring the ideas that we have. The concepts are out there, the smart readiness indicator, digitalization, how making things bi-directional, but how can you really roll it out and basically bring it together? Also then, I would say the dimension of renovating the envelope for that purpose, or grid services. So really the decentralization at work, I think this is something that we still need to get better. Of course, there are also, I would say, research and development to look further into new heat generators, or making heat pumps better to reduce the, as we have now seen, the REACH process is looking in certain refrigerants that you need basically to electrify in an efficient way the heating sector. There's a lot of, I would say, questions that are open. But from my perspective, the system integration aspect on that level is something where we have to work better together and put more effort in.
Benjamin, you had come in my ear that you wanted to come in on this subject as well.
Yeah, it was mainly to refer to the importance of energy-intensive industries like steel, cement, and a few others. These are really industries where there are no plenty of options to be fully decarbonized. These are hard to abate sectors for which maybe there should be a special attention to build the kind of infrastructures that are needed to make hydrogen available as an alternative technology in their production process. We have a series of demonstration projects in the EU showing how important hydrogen could be to decarbonize those sectors. I'm referring to the hybrid project in Sweden. There is also an interesting project, Jupiter, in Fos in France. These are sectors that should receive a priority in terms of demonstration and innovation. There is also another cluster of hard-to-abate sectors related to long-distance transport. Trucks, trains, aviations, ships are also sectors for which electrification might have a limited potential, and for which it would be interesting to boost a little bit the demonstration projects, the pilots, to try to catch up in terms of industrial leadership.
Nicholas, where do you think the funding priorities should be when we're talking about these new technologies, and how can the EU deliver on that through these vehicles that we're now talking about?
Okay, I think it's clear we have to focus on clean technologies and avoid lock-in effect, as I said before. And of course, we have to help the regions with more problems in the transition to a carbon neutral economy. We have the Next Generation EU, we have the Just Transition Fund, so I think that we have to put our money on that. I think also we have to think about in the energy system integration in the digitalization. That is also key, and we have also funds from the Next Generation EU to the digitalization. Of course, we have to use that in the digitalization of the energy sector and of course in the gas sector. And lastly, I want to say that I agree with Dennis. For example, in hydrogen, we have to think where to put our money investing in hydrogen. And of course, I will prefer to prioritize the hydrogen, the existing hydrogen, because we have a insignificant market now. All the hydrogen that we are going to produce, we must prioritize in heavy transport, such heavy trucks, train, maritime or aviation, and of course in heavy industries that are very difficult to decarbonize and very, very difficult to put into electrification. So I think this is the best way to put the money, the European money, on that. Because as I said at the beginning of the debate, the focus, the goal is decarbonize our economy to be climate neutral. This is the final goal.
Thanks. Well, let me start taking some questions that we've received from the audience here. So our first question comes from Henning Pretis. I've got the expanded version of his question here in the chat. Okay, so he's from Gelswasser AG. So he asks, where should all the green electricity for the green hydrogen come from? Isn't green electricity needed to electrify all sectors as far as possible? Do you really see the political willingness to feed large quantities of hydrogen into the distribution network? So on that first point, of course, green hydrogen is generated as a byproduct. And so if it's to be generated from an electricity plant, then we need to know where that electricity is coming from. So renewable energy is obviously one way to do that. Luca, let me put this question to you. Where would all of this green electricity for green hydrogen be coming from?
This is a very important and relevant issue that has been raised from the audience. The issue relates to what we call the additionality, in the sense that the European hydrogen strategy makes it clear, but also in the following debates, this issue is becoming even clearer. renewables to feed electrolyzers to produce green hydrogen should not subtract anything from the electrification process. Renewable energy to produce green hydrogen should be in addition to what is needed to continue the electrification process of our economy. And that's a challenge because, all these quantities of renewables are not available. So there is a lot to do, a lot to look into and to be invested there. Because as of today, there is not enough renewable energy in our continent now and in the foreseeable future to feed both with the challenging targets that we are setting ourselves.
Makes sense. Nicholas, let me put the same question to you. I mean, is this realistic to be thinking we would have the source for all of this green hydrogen?
Okay, we are thinking in 2050 and how to achieve the climate neutrality by 2050. Of course, these things are not going to happen next year or in the coming 5 years. So we have to build the regulation framework to do that. I think the hydrogen strategy is a good starting point. Of course, green hydrogen needs renewable electricity. So we have a huge potential. For example, in my country, and also in Portugal, my neighbors, I'm Spanish, we think that we need to promote the green hydrogen because we have a huge potential in renewables, solar power, wind power, and of course, solar and wind power are cheap nowadays. We have to look to the offshore production, the offshore strategy that we are working on that now. Estimate that we will produce around 400 gigabytes by 2050 in offshore wind. So we have to use the excess of electricity to produce this green hydrogen. Of course, we cannot take the renewable electricity that we need now. We have to produce more renewable electricity and, of course, improve the interconnections among all the member states of the EU, because we have some shortcuts in the interconnectivity in Europe, in the electricity. So we need to break these shortcuts, and we need to invest in better grids in electrification that, of course, it will improve the production of green hydrogen.
Let me take another question here. This one comes from Gabriel B. Why push blue hydrogen? Green hydrogen is both cheaper and more ecological. Is it better to apply CCS to industry and not hydrogen production? I think those are two separate questions. Would anyone like to jump in on this and defend blue hydrogen? No? Okay, I'm going to put... Wait, so there... Okay, let's go for it.
No, very, very quickly, just with what I said, green hydrogen today is not cheap at all. I think that Benjamin or somebody else was mentioning it before. Maybe in the medium long term, cost of electrolysis will decrease and become competitive. But as of today, what is really competitive is gray hydrogen, but of course we try to get out of it and to move to low carbon or blue hydrogen, which has a cost which is pretty low and I would say competitive in certain situations. So that's why we need low carbon hydrogen while waiting for the electrolyzers to become a more competitive technology on the market.
We have a related question here from Konstantin Drogos. What are the costs of making green hydrogen from electrolysis? Luke, I think you've answered that, but does anyone else want to come in on this issue of the cost of making green hydrogen? No, I think we've settled that there. So let me see, there's another question here for Luca. So this one's coming from Francesco Carreri. How robust are the cost estimates for CCUS? Again, you've touched upon that already. Maybe you could expand on that a bit. How do they impact in the business model of blue hydrogen?
CCS, it's an expensive technology somehow. We do believe in our case, I'm talking now back to the Ravenna project, that we have very specific conditions that could allow this project to be more competitive than elsewhere because of the existing infrastructure, the depleted gas fields, and all the rest, and to have hard to abate industrial clusters in the neighborhood. But still, as any new technology in the energy industry, CCS, hydrogen, they will all need to be supported by subsidies and incentives. Without this, no new technologies will come in, will affirm itself on the market at the beginning, unless you want the consumers to pay all the price for all this, as they do actually, at least in Italy, the market I know better in the case of renewables. As it happened with renewables, and is still happening, all the technologies that we are discussing today will need financial support, public funding from the EU, from governments, to be able to become more economically sustainable.
We have another question here from Gabriel B, and I think this touches on, actually another question I had wanted to ask you guys, which was about the context, the global context of all of this, and how Europe compares to the rest of the world in terms of developing these technologies. So Gabriel's question is, are there plans to create a hydrogen exportation market the way Australia is doing with Japan? Nicholas, let me put that to you first. First, how does Europe compare to the rest of the world with these hydrogen technologies? And is the plan to eventually develop such a leadership position in this that the EU could be exporting hydrogen?
Now, let me say one thing. We have some climate commitments. We have a Paris Agreement. So I think that the Australia plan is to burn LNG or coal to produce hydrogen and then export to the rest of the world. So we have some commitments and we have climate commitments. So let's respect them. We have a climate goal, climate neutral by 2050. So we want our hydrogen, our production of hydrogen, to use domestically at the beginning, because we don't have enough hydrogen now, even for industrial purpose. So first, let's think in our commitments, no think in the commitments of other parties or the non-commitments of other parties, as the Australian at these days. Of course, Japan has a good development of the hydrogen technologies. And of course, Europe is going to put a lot of money, but to create a domestic production of hydrogen. And then, of course, if we can export, it will be good, because it will be the outcome of a great industrial project. But let's say that we have to use and produce our hydrogen. And let me say one thing to Stefano. I didn't say that the green hydrogen produced by renewables was cheap. I say that renewable electricity produced by renewable sources is cheap nowadays, not the hydrogen. I guess that the CCS is more and more costly nowadays than the renewable production.
Benjamin, you wanted to come in on this?
Yeah, because it refers to one of the current buzzwords in the EU bubble, which is strategic autonomy, and this idea that European Union should increase its strategic autonomy by reshoring a series of strategic industrial activities. And this is, of course, something that we would support because we we need to avoid to outsource a series of manufacturing activities, especially for strategic sectors. But we fear that there is a kind of discrepancy between those slogans. EU wants to be the leader in renewable energy, in hydrogen, etc. Discrepancy between those slogans and what we can see on the ground. I mean, if you look to the supply side and the companies, the leading companies in terms of manufacturing electrolyzers, obviously a key equipment to produce hydrogen, green hydrogen. In the 20 leading companies on global markets, only 4 of them are located in the EU and not the biggest ones. If you really want to see the biggest ones, you have to look at China, even though we have some good companies as well in the EU. If you look on the demand side, for instance, in transport and automotive, the leading companies for fuel cells technologies are also rather located in Asia with Toyota, Hyundai, or Honda. Now, having said that, we have a series of very interesting projects led by European companies. For instance, you have a joint venture between Michelin and Faurecia for transport. You have also Alstom developing some interesting hydrogen-related appliances. But if we want the EU to really lead on those emerging industrial value chains, we need to scale up those initiatives and to provide additional support.
Stefan, let me put that question to you as well about the global context. Sorry, so Nicholas, you want to come in, and then we'll go to Stefan.
Previously, I said Stefan. I wanted to say Luca. Sorry, my comments were to Luca, not to Stefan. Sorry.
No worries. So, Stefan, how do you view how is Europe placed in this race for the new hydrogen technology compared to the rest of the world?
In my view, and just to come maybe briefly back to this question of costs, what I am aware of is that the cost of green hydrogen really produced from let's say offshore wind ranges somewhere in the ballpark of it's pretty much in the ballpark of current natural gas, if you have a certain carbon price. And the carbon price is in what I understand not excessive. It's in the ballpark of, let's say, 50 or 60 euros per ton of carbon, which is, by the way, the target value that Germany is foreseeing in its national emission trading a system or for 2025, if I'm not mistaken. So in my perspective, the price for green hydrogen could be something that is not terribly far off the mark of the
Stefan, I think we've lost your audio somehow.
Sorry. And what I want
you're
to
back.
add is what we perceive is, in principle, it's this system integration aspect where we see projects. I think now, for example, in the Netherlands, where you say, okay, we have an offshore wind farm, which is basically somehow vertically or integrated into basically producing hydrogen in certain I would say grid situations. So this, I would say, interplay of electricity and the gas and the hydrogen and the caverns, and to make the whole system resilient and basically fit for the transition when we want to phase out, for example, in Germany, not everywhere, I know, nuclear at the same time as lignite electricity production, at the same time as hard coal electricity production. How to solve this puzzle of basically taking everybody on board and giving enough hydrogen to industry, having a solution to mobility, having the grid stable. I think there hydrogen is probably a very interesting and maybe even indispensable, I would say, glue to make this to make the whole system work, which may not be easy to quantify only in a price per kilowatt hour figure.
Well, definitely a lot to digest there, especially when we're talking about all these different technologies. I wonder if I could get some closing remarks from each of you about your key takeaways from today's conversation. Nicholas, let's start with you. What would you say are your key takeaways from this talk?
Okay, let me say first that yes, we are going to be climate neutral by 2050. We will have some targets by 2030. And of course, we have to make a energy system integration where the gases, the renewable or green gases, or even low carbon gases will have a role. And of course, hydrogen will have a role. I said, and you can check all the debate that I said a lot of times, green hydrogen, because I bet on green hydrogen based on renewables, and of course in biogas. I think that we didn't talk a lot about biogas, but biogas will also have a role in the future of this energy transition. And let me say thank you to all the panelists for the discussion. That was very, very good for me. Thank you.
Stefan, how about your concluding remarks?
My concluding remark would be that we need all options to make this huge challenge work in a just way. And for the time being, I think we should see how we can synchronize basically the different agendas across sectors in a way that really is just and leaves nobody behind. And the green gases have a huge role to play for that also in the building sector.
Luca, what are your key takeaways from today?
I will pick up comments that were made by the other panelists, maybe. But first of all, let me restate that as an integrated energy company, at Eni, we are in all the businesses and technologies that we mentioned today. The traditional one, the new ones, the renewables, the decarbonized. We see really a need to have all technologies needed in our portfolio in order to move towards these challenging targets at European level. So we see a complementarity among them and no competition. Second point, picking up what Stefan was mentioning before, carbon pricing is very important, very relevant. In order to make most of these technologies competitive, we need a higher carbon pricing at European level and, if possible, at global level, of course. Third point, picking up from something that Benjamin mentioned earlier in the debate, we need to look at granularity and specific situations within Europe. There is no one size fits all in this field. If you look at offshore wind, electrolyzers, green hydrogen, the conditions that you can find in Northern Europe around the North Sea are not the same that you have in the southern part of the continent, where conditions are different and starting point are different. So in order to get to the targets that we all support, we really need to look at specific situation and be careful not to impose one size for all the markets. Thank you.
And finally, Benjamin, what are your concluding thoughts?
Yeah, my concluding thought will be kind of political message. I think that we are in the middle of the harshest economic downturn we have seen since the end of World War II, with major GDP contraction and job losses that have already been announced and that will be announced in the coming months and years. It's absolutely crystal clear. If you look, for instance, at the European Commission fall economic forecast published a couple of weeks ago. And we have seen in our sectors a series of job losses announced, including in the energy sector. Exxon, Total, Iberdrola, General Electric, all together, the job losses announced by those companies during the last year represent more than 5,000 job losses. So in that context, it's more important than ever to build the transition towards a low carbon economy, towards carbon neutrality by 2050 on just transition principles. And the key bedrock of a just transition approach is to have an industrial strategy in line with the Green Deal objectives, in line with the Paris Agreement, but that will secure good jobs and secure industrial value chains in the EU. And we have two concrete opportunities ahead of us. We have the Fit to 55% package expected for June next year. We hope that the Commission will come with a clean industry package as well to accompany the revision of the 2030 target with an update of its of its industrial strategy. And we also have the recovery and the national recovery plans that member states are currently designing. There is a complete lack of transparency about their content, but we hope that social partners at national level will be invited in those discussions to ensure that the industrial strategy, the industrial dimension will get significant, enough attention in those plans. This is the little hope and the little bit of optimism I wanted to finish with. So we have the Green Deal, we have the recovery strategy, and those tools must be used to boost the transformation of industry, including for the green gas industry.
Thanks, Benjamin, and thanks to all our panelists for some great insights today, and also to you at home for asking some great questions. This debate about the future of gas and these exciting new gas technologies will continue, I'm sure, but for now we'll leave it there. Thank you all at home for watching, and we'll see you next time for the next Euractiv Debates.